This unit is all about trigonometry, and we are going to go through and look at several key areas of trigonometry, and these are all introductory topics that we will be returning to in Algebra 2. So it's important that you really focus and think about how to use these topics because they will show up again. So Section 1 is we are going to work on trig calculations with right triangles and non-right triangles. And so we're going to work with the law of sines and the law of cosines to start with. And these are a little bit algebra heavy, but some pretty powerful theorems and formulas. So the first thing we want to understand is what is trig and what are trig ratios. And you may remember back from Algebra 1 when you talked a little bit about SOHCAHTOA. And we talked about a ratio of sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent in a right triangle. And if you don't remember that, that's fine. But what trig is based on is the fact that for any 32-degree angle, the ratio of the opposite side over the hypotenuse is going to be consistent no matter how big or how small the triangle is. And so that's a really powerful idea. The ratio of the adjacent over the hypotenuse, of the opposite over the adjacent. And so we can use those known ratios, and it has to do with similar triangles, which we studied at the beginning of this quarter. So these trig ratios, the trig ratios themselves are usually expressed as fractions, sometimes as decimals. And if we know those fractions and decimals, we can undo the ratio, so to speak, and get the angle out because that unique ratio will always correspond to the exact same angle. So that's kind of one of the first just nuts and bolts pieces that we're going to talk about, and that is called the inverse. Okay, and so on your calculators, you're going to see something like, you're going to see a cosine button on your calculator, and right above it, you're going to see something that is like cosine minus 1. And then you'll have a sine button, and above that, you'll have a sine minus 1 and a tangent button and a tangent minus 1. You may have to hit the shift key to see those or access them depending on what kind of calculator you are using. So if I just want to find, also make sure your calculator is in degrees. Okay, it should say DEG, not radians, RAD. Those are 2 units of measure. It's kind of like Celsius and Fahrenheit, and we are only going to be dealing with degrees. And if you don't have your calculator in degrees, you're going to get a wacky wrong answer. So to find the tangent of 150, so that would be basically if I had this right triangle and I had a 150-degree angle here. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. What is the ratio of these two sides together? That's really what it's saying, is what is that relationship? And if I just go to my calculator and I am in degrees and I say 150 tangent, I get this really long decimal. And we're usually going to talk about 2 or 3 decimal places. And so I'm going to have negative 0.577 or negative 0.58. Okay, we want to be really careful with rounding errors and when we round and how much we round. So these are pretty straightforward. Cosine of 32, you go right to your calculator and you say 32 cosine, and it's 0.848. Okay, cosine and sine are always less than 1. You did something wrong. If you end up with a number greater than 1 and you call it sine or cosine, and your calculator will tell you you have an error. Now some calculators you have to get cosine, then the number, some you do the number, then the trig function. You just need to get familiar with your calculator. So this is where the inverse comes in. In this problem, I know the ratio already. This is the ratio. of their sides, and I don't know what the angle is. And so it's as simple as I go to my calculator and I enter in 0.53, and then I'm going to do inverse, and you're going to see these minus, cosine minus 1. And this is a 58-degree angle. Now, if I want to check that quick and show how that works, if I say 58 cosine, I get 0.53. So no matter how big or small my triangle is, the adjacent and hypotenuse sides will have a ratio of 0.53. That is their relationship. So these are pretty straightforward. Straight calculator work. So again, if you don't have one of those TI 30s, you may want to pick one up. They're $10 or $12, super powerful calculators. Tangent of V, make sure you're using the correct trig ratio. Tangents can be greater than 1, and again I hit that inverse and I look for the tangent minus 1, and that is a 66.04 degree angle. Okay, and the sine of M is 0.978, and if I say 0.978 and I hit inverse or shift and I find sine inverse, so really I'm looking at a 77.96, a 78-degree angle. So those of you that want to think about opposite operations, really what I'm doing here is I'm taking the sine inverse of both sides, because what I do to one side must do to the other. The sine inverse and the sine cancel, and I end up with m is equal to the sine inverse of 0.978. That's what I put in my calculator, and I find out that angle M is 78 degrees. So that's just the quick basics, and this lesson will continue in part 2 of the video.